Segura Pema CD Hung Onga Hung Ben Segura Pema CD Hung Onga Ben Segura Pema CD Hung. Welcome everyone to the first Dharma talk of, by me anyway, of 2015. Happy New Year to all of you. It's Saturday, 3 o'clock, second lifetime, and we will be talking about the Suttas of the Pali Canon in continuation for the next half year, in which we examine each sutta of the Pali Canon in the Digha Nikaya in sequence each week. So let me just find my message, which I have lost, and I'll go over the basics and then we can begin. You may hear my cat Zenji in the background. There we go. Okay, my Buddhist name is Tseten, and as most of you are aware by now, I assume, I don't know if there's I think there are some new faces in the group today. As I said, we're discussing the Suttas of the Digha Nikaya, which is the first section of the Sutta Pitaka, which is the second part of the Pali Canon, which constitutes the oldest suttas or texts of Buddhism in Pali. We're doing one sutta per week. We started, I guess, approximately 10 weeks ago, and there are 34 suttas in the Digha Nikaya. So the whole thing will take approximately 34 weeks, at which time the talks will be published as a book. If you're interested in seeing this or previous talks, you can go to my blog. I'm just going to put it in this information in the chat for you. You can go to my blog, www.palisuttas.com. I do post all the talks there, as well as other things. If you're interested in my books, you can click on them in the blog, or you can go directly to www.chronicapress.com. The link is in the chat. I also have a YouTube channel called Naked Dharma. If you type Naked Dharma in the search, it will be the first thing that comes up. Or, once again, the URL is there. It is customary in Dharma talks to hold your questions till the end as a gesture of respect for the Dharma. However, I prefer it that if you would have questions, you would ask them when they occur to you, so that the matter that you're asking about is uppermost in your and mine and everybody else's mind. So please feel free to break in if you have a question in the chat. I'll try and keep my eye on the nearby chat as we go along, if I can see it over my cat. And we can address issues as they arise. This talk will also be available at the end of the talk as a note card, as are all my talks. And I would appreciate it if you would IM me at the end of the talk and ask me for the note card. I would be happy to send it to you. The note cards or many of the note cards are also available in Second Life. There's a sim called Mount Everest Sim. Again, the name is there in the chat. They are archiving most of my talks. Soon they'll have all, but apparently they don't have everything. But they have most of it. And if you go to Mount Everest Sim, and that's the name of the sim, Mount Everest, and look for the Buddhist College, then look for the library, which is on the the mountainside above the Buddhist College. Find the library in the building. Find the room where there's a table with a bunch of scrolls on a table. If you click the scrolls, my note cards are in the scrolls. And also, they are also available now in Zhuangzhung, which is in the Visit Atoll sim right now. We're going to be changing the name of that sim to Zhuangzhung, but the proper name of it is Zhuangzhung. And if you go to the Shaolin temple, which is more or less in the center, people are IMing me. I would appreciate it if you would not IM me during the talk, because it is very distracting. So if you go to the Shaolin temple in Zhuangzhung, on the second story, to answer Zosa's question, the region name was always Visit Atoll. The parcel name currently is Zhuangzhung. The SIM name is Visit Atoll, and I'm going to be changing it when I can afford it. It's cost me $90 to Zhuangzhung. The SIM name will be Zhuangzhung as well. So that will happen probably in the next month, but not right away. So if you're looking for it on the map, look for Visit Atoll or Atoll. So if you go to Zhuangzhung and you go to the Shaolin Temple, which is in the center of the SIM, and you go up to the second story, go into the room with the double doors, which is the library, and you'll see a bookcase there. If you click the bookcase, we have all of the note cards there for these talks, as well as other note cards as well. We have approximately 70 items in the bookcase, which are available for you to receive and have. Okay, so that's about it. Does anyone have any questions about any of that before we commence with the talk proper? Okay, so we missed last week because of the holidays, and normally I do one talk per one sutta per talk. I prefer to do it that way so you can focus on each sutta as a discrete entity, one at a time. However, some of the suttas are longer or shorter than others, and in this case, it wasn't possible for me to make a full 1-hour talk out of any one of the 3 suttas that I'm going to be discussing today. So today we will be doing, for the first time, we will be discussing 3 suttas. The Subha Sutta, which is the 10th sutta of the Digha Nikaya, the Kevaddha Sutta, which is the 11th, and the Lohicca Sutta, which is the 12th. So starting with the Subha Sutta, and this is going to be very quick because it's largely a repeat of things that we've discussed in previous suttas. As those of you who are reading the suttas by now have probably noticed, this is an oral tradition that was preserved for 300 years before it was written down, and it has the marks of oral recitation all over it, and they are highly repetitive. The suttas of the Pali Canon are very repetitive. So in this case, most of what is in the Subha Sutta we've already covered in previous talks. The location of the sutta is the same as the 9th sutta, Jeta's Grove in the Natapindika Park in Savatthi, except that instead of the Buddha it is Ananda, and the Buddha is deceased. So this is therefore a post-parinirvana sutta. Parinirvana, of course, referring to the passing on or death of the Buddha. The suttas are, incidentally, for those of you who are new, the suttas are also not in chronological order. So they jump all over the place in terms of the chronology of the Buddha's life, and you just have to accept that. We're doing them in the order in which they are preserved in the Pali Canon. At the same time, Subha, the young son of the Brahmin Tadeya, was also in Savatthi on some business. Hearing of Ananda's proximity, he sent his servant to invite Ananda to come to his house. Again, for those of you who are new, of course, Ananda is the personal attendant of the Buddha for the last 25 years of his life. However, Ananda demurs due to sickness and suggests that he come the following day. Early the next morning, Ananda makes his way to Subha's home, accompanied by the venerable monastic Chetaka for their morning meal or breakfast. Subha would like Ananda to tell him which things the Buddha praised and dispraised during his life. Ananda says that the Buddha praised 3 things: morality, concentration, and wisdom, reiterating what we heard in Sutta 1, that the practice of morality alone is insufficient. This is the threefold classification of the Noble Eightfold Path that we've discussed at some length in previous talks, and so I'm not going to go into it again here. And that's all I have to say about the Subha Sutta. There's not much more to it than that. In fact, the translator mentions that it's been mentioned by other translators and himself that It's almost no point having the sutta in the collection because it is so repetitive of previously occurring materials. But this simply demonstrates the vigor with which the redactors of the Pali Canon collected and preserved the suttas. So for us, it's a good thing. It may be repetitive, but it shows that they were really making an effort when they collected the Pali Canon together to preserve all the different traditions that existed at that time. So, going on, I don't think there's any need to have any discussion of that. So, going on to the Kevaddha Sutta, which is the 11th Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, we have a little more to chew on. And the location of this sutta is Pawarika's mango grove in Nalanda, which you may recognize that name. Almost 1,000 years later, Nalanda would become the site of the first Buddhist university. Nalanda is described as rich, populous, prosperous, and also strongly Buddhist. That is to say, there were many Buddhists in the community. The householder Kevaddha, possibly a fisher, suggests that since the Buddha had so much support in the town already, if a monk were to perform some superhuman feat or a miracle, that would increase the town's faith in the Buddha even more. The Buddha rather sharply informs Kevaddha that this is not how he trains the monastics of the Buddhist order. You may, if those of you are familiar with the New Testament, may recognize a similar parallel in teachings of Yeshua or Jesus, who says something very similar. In fact, there are a lot of parallels between the Pali Canon and the Gospels. When Khuddaka presses the Buddha says that he has declared 3 categories of miracle: psychic powers, or iddhi, telepathy, or adesana, and instruction, or anusasane. Adesana, which Walsh translates as telepathy, can also mean prophecy. We have discussed the Buddhist acceptance of psychic powers in a previous talk. The distinction made here between psychic powers and telepathy seems to be between powers experienced somewhat paradoxically in the body, for example, self-replication, invisibility, passing through solid objects, etc., and the mind, that is telepathy. Perhaps psychic is a poor translation here, because in customary parlance, telepathy is also a psychic power. However, one struggles to find a satisfactory alternative. Perhaps magical powers, which are referred to in the canon, might be better. But in English, the word magical also has connotations of sleight of hand and charlatanry. Supernormal or supernatural is even worse, because from the Buddhist perspective, these powers are perfectly natural. The word iddhi literally means attainment. Finally, the miracle of instruction is offered for comparison with these. The Buddha says that he dislikes and despises miracles. That's a quote. Dislikes and despises, quote unquote, miracles, such as psychic powers and telepathy, not because they do not exist or are intrinsically debased or debasing, but because those who see such a display of psychic power may simply think that they are the result of some kind of personal power or some technical or magical procedure, rather than crediting the Dharma that is the real cause of these things, a kind of magic in essence. And thus they may be directed towards some sort of sorcery rather than the salvation that is offered by the Dharma. In the West, we might call this occultism. Against these, the Buddha posits the miracle of instruction or teaching. Why is teaching a miracle? The Buddha refers specifically to the power of truth. This doctrine appears from time to time throughout the Pali Canon, notably in the Jataka tales, where truth itself, especially the truth of the Dharma, the preeminent truth of reality, is intrinsically efficacious. This is a pan-Indian notion. It isn't purely Buddhist. In other suttas, the Buddha says that Dharma and things related to the Dharma are supremely efficacious. the Buddha makes it quite clear that we are discussing a philosophy, quote, "Consider in this way, don't consider in that. Direct your mind this way, not that way. Give up that, gain this, and persevere in it," unquote. In addition to philosophy, the Buddha refers to practices of renunciation and cultivation and refers to the significance of perseverance. Thus, one may speak of practice as involving a kind of energy. Hence, the concept of psychic energy is perfectly consistent with Buddha's teachings. Buddhist philosophy is, moreover, distinguished in this, that it requires action and that it leads to the highest goal. Buddhism is preeminently a philosophy of action, or we might say a philosophy of practice. As we have seen before, this is attained by the attainment of the unity of morality, meditation, and wisdom, because of which one attains cessation. This is the supreme ontological attainment, the supreme psychic power. Although the Buddha says, ontological, incidentally, for those of you who don't know, simply means referring to being, the science of being, or simply real. So this is the supreme ontological attainment, the supreme psychic power. Although the Buddha says that he rejects them, he also says that he has mastered psychic powers and telepathy, in addition to the third miracle of instruction. We have also seen how the Buddha teaches that spiritual realization leads to psychic powers as well. Possibly that he was the first Indian to make this association, as we also discussed in a previous talk. There may also be other ways of looking at these, which we will discuss in later suttas. Kevaddha's request to the Buddha to prove himself by means of psychic powers is impertinent. The Buddha tells him the story of another impertinent monk. This monk, who is not named, made samadhi, that is to say, he meditated or concentrated upon the question, quote, "I wonder where the four great elements, the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the air element, cease without remainder," unquote. Today we would call this vipassana, which means something like transcendent vision or insight. Literally, it means true seeing, the seeing beyond sight, or second sight. But in this context, it is almost a kind of divination. So intense was the monk's concentration that a vortex opened up before him, a way leading to the transcendent Deva worlds. And that slide there is an impression of what he experienced. So he traveled vertically through the Deva worlds. And I just have a note there. In the Western esoteric tradition, this is called rising on the plains. So he traveled vertically through the Deva worlds, including the realms of the four great kings. In fact, I will switch slides at this point. There you go. So these are the realms I'm about to talk about. He traveled vertically through the Deva worlds, including the realms of the four great kings, the world of nature spirits, the 33 gods, essentially anthropomorphic deities, alluding originally to the Vedic pantheon, the yamas, the spirits of the air, Tseten, the home of the bodhisattvas, Nimanarati, the creative spirits, the Paranimita Vasawatis, spirits who parasitically delight in the creations of others, and these are the capitalists of the Kamaloka. The Brahma Devas, who enjoy the first jhana, governed. The jhanas, again, for those of you who are new, are of course the meditative accomplishments. The Brahma Devas, who enjoy the first jhana, governed by the great Brahma, who we would simply call God. He speaks to the inhabitants and the rulers of these realms, none of whom know the answer to his question. Incidentally, we learn in the course of this sutta the names of the rulers of each of these realms, and I've tabulated those in the right-hand column of the chart, which you see on the slideshow. And just a few notes concerning those names. Brahma is more of a title than a name. Several Brahmas are referred to in the Pali Canon, including Baka, Sahampati, who convinced the Buddha to teach the Dharma when he achieved enlightenment. As some of those of you who have attended my talks before know, the Buddha hesitated to teach Dharma after he achieved enlightenment because he was concerned that he would be misunderstood or not understood. And it was Sahampati who came to him and entreated him to teach, whereupon he changed his mind and decided, instead of becoming a Pratyeka Buddha, a Buddha who does not teach, he decided to become a teaching Buddha. And finally, Sanat Kumara is the name of another Brahma mentioned in the Pali Canon of theosophical fame. With respect to the, which one is it? Oh, I don't have my notes attached to those things. With respect to the 33 gods, in any case, which you'll notice second from the bottom, I have appended a note, which I don't think I'm going to read here, in which I list the names of the 33 gods. They will be on the blog. I'm not going. They're just a list of names. I don't think they will have a very great interest to you. So if you are interested in learning what the names of the 33 gods are, and I see a note here, let me just finish my sentence and then I'll read it. If you're interested in seeing what the names of the 33 gods are, simply go at 7 o'clock Eastern Time or at 4 o'clock Second Life Time. The blog will be automatically published at polysuttas.com. You can go look at that note and you can see the names if you're interested in that. And again, same thing with the 4 great kings. And whoever changed my slide, I would appreciate it if you'd not do that. Thank you very much. With respect to the 4 great kings, again, those are obviously not a name. There are names. The 4 great kings do have names. And again, I'm not going to read them during the talk, but if you're interested in seeing what they are appended to the table in the blog, which will appear automatically on my blog at 4 o'clock Second Lifetime. Now, we do have an observation, I guess. I don't see a question mark. Jospe says, Sanat Kumara is an esoteric tradition said to be the old of days of the Bible. Okay, thank you very much. That, of course, is in the theosophical tradition. Sanat Kumara is an interesting deity, and you can find out things about him in Wikipedia and elsewhere if you're interested in pursuing that further. Okay. To the theist, whether Indian or Semitic, and we must remember that Hinduism is theistic, the Buddhist view of God seems sacrilegious, and it appears deliberately so, similar to the Gnostic demiurge, whether or not the latter is derived from the Buddhist idea as suggested by Edward Conze and Elaine Pagels, two Buddhist/Gnostic scholars, and that is William Blake's interpretation of the demiurge on the slide. One cannot escape the note of irony and humor in the Buddha's story, which need not imply that the Buddha does not believe in the vertical dimension of reality or even the devas themselves. Great Brahma is unpredictable. Quoting from the Sutta, we do not know when, how, and where Brahma will appear. However, when the signs are seen, when a light appears and radiance shines forth, then Brahma will appear. Such signs are an indication that he will appear, unquote. We have noted before the literal meaning of devas as shining ones. I mention this from time to time. Those of you who have attended my talk on fallen angels, human beings, and fallen angels, human beings in Buddhist cosmology, something like that is the title. I discussed it at some length. And note that Brahma himself is not identified with the radiant light. Rather, the radiant light is a prelude to the appearance of Brahma, who is invisible, unknown, and unpredictable. After a short time, Brahma appears, and the monk asks him, quote, "Friend, Where do the four great elements, earth, water, fire, air, cease without remainder? Unquote. The great Brahma replies, again, quote, I am Brahma, great Brahma, the conqueror, the unconquered, the all-seeing, all-powerful, the Lord, the maker and creator, the ruler, appointer and orderer, father of all that have been and shall be, unquote. However, the great Brahma has not answered the question, and the monk points this out. So the great Brahma merely repeats his declaration, rather like an automaton. I am Brahma, great Brahma, the conqueror, the unconquered, all-seeing, all-powerful, the Lord, the maker and creator, the ruler, appointer and orderer, father of all that have been and shall be, unquote. Again, the monk tries to get an answer. And this time Brahma takes the monk by the arm and leads him aside, and saying to him, quote, Phoenix Aglow asks, is Brahma inherently male or also female? In the tradition, the Indian tradition, and the Buddhist tradition, which is of course an Indian tradition, Brahma is male, inherently male. And this is one of the points of misogyny that we discussed in my talk on the status of women in ancient India and the Pali tradition. There are certain categories of spiritual being that no woman can ever attain to, and Brahma is one of those. No woman can ever be reborn as Brahma. Remember, Brahma is not an individual, Brahma is an office. So different beings will be reborn in that state as other beings who have been in that state fall into a lower state and are reborn in another world. And no, according to the Orthodox view, no woman can ever be reborn as Brahma. So, the Brahma takes the... Kunter asks, so a female can be reborn as a male into the office or Brahma. A female would have to aspire to be reborn as a male, which in the Orthodox view is a superior rebirth. Although I contest that. We discussed this in my discussion of misogyny in the talk I mentioned, and it's in the library if you want to go read it. I give it from time to time. It's called The Status of Women. I'll type it for you. The Status of Women in Ancient India and the Pali Tradition. So in the traditional Buddhist view, a woman would have to aspire to develop, through merit, to develop positive karma and develop the merit to be reborn as a male, and then he would have the possibility of being reborn in the state of a Brahma. And in fact, we're going to be discussing that in a couple of suttas. Well, it can be nonsense to you or not. I'm teaching the Pali Canon, and how you interpret those teachings and what you choose to accept and not accept is up to you. I do agree that the Buddha was not a misogynist, and I discussed that thesis at some length in my talk that I've mentioned. So you'll be happy to learn that in my view, based on an analysis of the texts, the Buddha was not a misogynist. However, he wanted to know the traditional view is that a woman cannot be born as a Brahma. And the traditional view is that the birth of a woman is an inferior one to that of a man. However, that said, one also has to recognize that a human birth is a very advantageous and superior rebirth in itself. So we're talking about shades of gray here. We're not talking about an extreme difference between men and women. The arguments against women, I'm not going to repeat them here because I think that would take us too far into the subject, but I do discuss it at great length in the talk, and you can read that talk if you wish. So, After his 3 attempts to get an answer from Brahma, and unsuccessfully, or 2 attempts I should say, after his 3rd attempt, Brahma takes the monk by the arm and leads him aside, and Brahma says to him, quote, "Monk, these devas believe there is nothing Brahma does not see, there is nothing he does not know, there is nothing he is unaware of. That is why I did not speak in front of them. But monk, I don't know where the 4 great elements cease without remainder." The great Brahma, therefore, is the Wizard of Oz. The great Brahma does not know where the 4 great elements cease without remainder. God is not omniscient. The backstory to God's ignorance is told in another sutta, which we will save for that occasion. The great Brahma then reprimands the monk for going behind the Buddha's back. Quote, "You have acted incorrectly by going beyond the Blessed Lord and going in search of an answer to this question elsewhere. Now, monk, you just go to the Blessed Lord and put this question to him, and whatever answer he gives, accept it." Unquote. So, stepping into the vortex, once again, the monk appears before the Buddha and asks him his question. Oh, I'm sorry, I see a question here that I missed. Jospe asks, if it is an office, what would his job be? He is the ruler of the Brahma worlds. He is the chief Brahma of the worlds of Brahmas. So the Brahma worlds consist of devas or gods, and Brahma is the big one in those worlds. He is the chief or the ruler of those worlds. The foremost Brahma, if you want to put it that way. So stepping into the vortex once again, the monk appears before the Buddha, and he asks the Buddha his question. Finally, he comes around after going through all the Deva worlds, or at least up to the Brahma world, and not able to find an answer. No one knows the answer. He goes to the Buddha. And the Buddha compares the monk to a land-sighting bird. A land-sighting bird, like Noah's dove, returns to the ship if it does not find land. Similarly, the monk has returned to the Buddha in search of an answer to his question. It seems that another story has been inserted into the sutta, and in the process, the first part of the story, when the monk was first with the Buddha, implied but never told, has been elided or deleted. And perhaps we'll find it again in another sutta. Perhaps the Buddha is refusing to answer the monk's question, which the Buddha says is wrongly put. It is not that the 4 great elements cease, but that they find no footing. This is the distinction that the Buddha makes. The Buddha frames this as a place, and I'm putting that in quotes, a place where duality is destroyed. The Buddha's reply sounds almost like the riddle of the Sphinx. And for those of you who are not familiar with classical mythology, it was said in late lore that Hera or Ares sent the Sphinx from her Ethiopian homeland. The Greeks always remembered the foreign origin of the Sphinx, to Thebes in Greece, where she asks all passers-by the most famous riddle in history: which creature has 1 voice and yet becomes 4-footed and 2-footed and 3-footed? She strangled and devoured anyone unable to answer. So that's the riddle of the Sphinx, and of course, structurally it's suggestive of the question which the monk has asked, and I'm just trying to find my place. Okay, the Buddha's reply, sounds like the riddle of the Sphinx. Where do earth, water, fire, and air no footing find? Where are long and short, small and great, fair and foul? Where are name and form, wholly destroyed? That's his reply. The binary unity of name and form, nama rupa, the psychosomatic complex, subject and object, sometimes translated mind and matter, itself dual and transdual, refers to the 5 aggregates, as well as the 4 nidanas of the chain of interdependent arising, the paticca samuppada. And this is an important topic, and it's the first time it's come up in a substantive way, so I'm going to divagate a little bit and discuss this doctrine of the paticca samuppada. The Pali paticca, following from anything as a necessary result, that's the meaning of the word, plus sam, which means together, plus pada, which means cause. So that's the etymology of it, paticca samappada. At least 12 English translations have been proposed, none of which has less than 6 syllables. There are already 2 English words that have approximately this meaning, co-determination and co-production. Personally, I prefer either of these to such tongue torturers as interdependent origination and interdependent co-arising. The essential meaning of the phrase is that effect and the cause are mutually involved. There is no effect without a cause, there is no cause without an effect. Therefore, they are the same. Hence, the unity of cause and effect is paticca samappada. From this, various inferences follow, including the beginninglessness of samsara, the now, non-locality, and transduality. The term also refers to a specific chain, or nidana, of 12 cause effects that shows samsara as an essential, though illusory, aspect of reality. I'm sure everyone here knows that samsara is, of course, the illusory world of appearances, or the phenomenal world. Although the wheel of samsara seems to represent a closed system, 2 links are subject to will, that is ignorance, or avidya, the root of the whole system, and craving, or tanha, resulting in 2 paths to transcendence. The primary path of wisdom corresponding to ignorance, the solution or cure of ignorance is wisdom, and the secondary path of dispassion corresponding to desirous attachment. The former is the path of the bodhisattva, which leads to Buddhahood. The latter, the path of the stream entrant, the sotapanna, which leads to arhantship. Just give me a moment to find my place again, and then we'll continue. Sorry, I'm flipping up and down in this thing because I'm going to footnotes. There we go. Therefore, Namarupa is destroyed by the realization of the transdual. The 4 great elements which arise out of the interdependent unity of name and form are sensory cognitive modes, and as such, essentially dual in character as is reason itself. The cessation of the 4 great elements suggests a physical place, whereas the Buddha's answer pertains to mind, specifically the transcendence of dualistic, rational, sense-bound consciousness. The answer, therefore, is in the mind. But even this is false if you objectify the mind, for the mind is not an object. The mind is the precondition of all objectification. Again, quoting from the Sutta, where consciousness is signless, and the Pali word is anidasanam, boundless, all luminous, which is pabang or pahang. That's where earth, fire, water, and air find no footing. I see a question there, but I'll just finish this quotation before I address it. Where consciousness is signless, anidasanam, boundless, all luminous, which is the Pali pabang or pahang. That's where earth, fire, water, and air find no footing. There, both long and short, small and great, fair and foul, there name and form are wholly destroyed. With the cessation of consciousness, this is all destroyed. And now, Phoenix Aglow asks, if there is a unity of cause and effect, what is karma based on? That is an enormously interesting and complex and involved question, which Nagarjuna, and arguably the greatest philosopher in Buddhist history, wrote an entire book about. Karma is itself a unity, but which manifests in dualistic consciousnness and in the samsara, which is itself dualistic, as cause and effect. The cause/effect that is the unity that underlies that duality is the intrinsic, in European philosophy it's called the prima mobile, the intrinsic tendency of reality to differentiation. which manifests as this dualistic cause and effect dynamic. So karma isn't based on anything. It is simply itself, but it is the cause is the effect is the cause. The two things go back forever, go forward forever, and they're constantly creating each other in samsara, creating the illusion of duality. But in fact, there is this unitary dynamic principle without which samsara itself cannot be explained. That's the best I can explain it in 30 seconds. We could do a whole talk just on that question. We could do a whole talk just on karma. Eric Hunter says, is the Buddha making the correction to the monk based on the ideology that the monk's question is based in materialistic or physical thinking, whereas Dharma could be considered the practice of processes and thereby signals why the monk's question was improper? That's it. That's it, exactly. That is exactly the distinction he's making. Jospe asks, maybe the question is why it is functioning as it is. Not quite sure what your question means, so I'm not able to answer it. If you want to elaborate a little more so I can understand it better, if I can understand it, then I will attempt to answer it. Top Golden asks, cause and effect interact with each other. Yes, and that's the paradox that Nagarjuna points out. If every cause is an effect and every effect is a cause, then there is no distinction between them. But if there's no distinction between them, then how do causes and effects give rise to each other? That's essentially the paradox that Nagarjuna raises in his book. It's a long Sanskrit title, which the exact form of which escapes me, but it's his major work, and you could probably find it online. This is one of the points that Nagarjuna raises in order to demonstrate the illusory or dreamlike nature of samsara, that it's essentially self-contradictory ultimately. Jospace says, karma seems to direct into an upward-moving direction towards better morality. Karma, the law of karma is the basis of morality in Buddhism. Buddhism is, and I've mentioned this in other talks, Buddhism is unique. The Buddha's great contribution to philosophy is that he's established an ontological basis for morality, whereas Western philosophy has ended up in nihilism because Western philosophy is initially based in theism, derived morality and ethics from the dictates of a deity. That's our Judeo-Christian heritage or our Semitic heritage. Once you transcend or reject, if you like, the concept of deity, morality seems to have no basis. And modern philosophy seems to be increasingly moving towards the view that morality and the basis of morality and ethics are essentially arbitrary, which of course has led us into such abysses as fascism. And the Buddha's great contribution to philosophy is that he has found an ontological basis for morality in the law of karma. Argus Portal says, sorry, shortly, back to the Brahmin part. Maybe I have a language problem, but understood I right that women has to become male to achieve higher goals. Is that part of the Pali Canon? Yes, it is. That is what the Pali Canon says. Now, whether that is what the Buddha believed or taught is another question. And as I said, I've referred you to the talk. It's a 2-hour talk. It's difficult for me to summarize here, and it's a topic which is not really specifically related to this sutta. So I don't want to go into it at great length. But if you speak, for example, to a Theravadin Buddhist, they will tell, if they are consistent and know the texts, they will tell. That's exactly what they will tell you. That a woman's being born as a woman is a result of inferior karma, and if they want to aspire to a higher rebirth, then they must aspire to a rebirth as a man, and then from then be reborn into progressively higher states. Whether that is the Buddha's teaching or not is a different matter. And I don't want to get into that because it would take us too far afield. But as I said, you can read the talk. It's in the library in Zhangzhung. It's called The Status of Women in Ancient India and the Pali Tradition. And the women in the audience will be pleased to learn that I do conclude in that talk that the Buddha was not a misogynist, despite those passages in the Pali Canon. But your question was, what does the Pali Canon say? And yes, that is what it says. Phoenix Aglow says, is in proposing the interior mind is where to look for release, then is mind more basic than matter? Yes, it is. Matter is also illusory, and the ultimate reality is mind. That is absolutely correct. Mind, we have to keep in mind when we use the English word mind, English is has a far less rich vocabulary, both psychological and spiritual, than Pali. So in one context, we may be talking about mind as involved with the senses and objects. In a different context, we may be speaking of mind or consciousness as the ultimate reality. And there's no contradiction there. It's simply that we're using this one word, mind, in English for a range of understandings of mind that are in Pali are very sharply distinguished, but in English are not so sharply distinguished. So it may appear muddled to someone who's hearing it in English, but in fact it's not muddled at all. It simply reflects the impoverishment of English, the vocabulary, with respect to this range of concepts. Top Golden says our mind is unique, but it does connect us to us being human because we are. Our mind is unique, but it does connect to us being human because we are. Okay, I don't see a question there, so we'll just leave that as a contribution. Thank you very much. So that's an important passage, so perhaps I'll just quickly repeat it to get back on track with the talk, but I won't give the Pali. Where consciousness is signless, boundless, and all luminous, that's where earth, fire, water, and earth find no footing. There, both long and short, small and great, fair and foul, there, name and form are wholly destroyed. With the cessation of consciousness, this is all destroyed. The Buddha's reference to, unquote, the Buddha's reference to, quote, both long and short, small and great, fair and foul, unquote, reminds us of Chapter 2 of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, and quoting, to be and not to be grow out of each other. The ominous and the facile impale each other. The eternal and the momentary mold each other. Above and below topple each other. Voice and instrument harmonize with each other. Past and future follow each other. Unquote. And that's my own translation. Transdual consciousness, therefore, has three qualities: signlessness, boundlessness, and all luminosity. The first quality is dasanang in Pali. It refers to the invisible or the unseen. All luminosity is Pali pabang. Pabang means radiant. Pa implies direction, hence the vector or ray. So it's the light as a ray. Walsh gives an alternative form of this word that presumably appears in some editions of the Pali Canon, which is pahang. The difference is the difference between the... I will actually put it in the chat. You can see what the difference is. That M is pronounced ng. So it's pabang and pahang. Pahang is a very obscure word and may mean the steps leading down into the cleansing water of nirvana, that is to say, or even giving up entirely. And it's been some translators have translated it as abandonment. Although Buddhaghosa favors the latter interpretation, Walsh prefers the former, so there you are. These three characteristics suggest the tripartite ayin of the Kabbalistic diagram of the tree of life, the Etz Chaim, that constitutes the basis of the metaphysical system of the Western esoteric tradition, namely Ayin, or nothing, Ein Sof, or without limit, and Ein Sof, or Ein Sof, light without limit. And I have a diagram showing that relationship on the slide. Kabbalah is, of course, Jewish mysticism. It's very interesting that signlessness, boundlessness, and all luminosity correspond precisely to this tripartite division of Ayin, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Or, which are, of course, the most ultimate and most subtle levels of reality in the Kabbalistic model. Apparently, Kevaddha was delighted and rejoiced in these words of the Buddha. His answer found his riddle solved. So that completes our discussion of the Kevaddha Sutta. And we have one to go, the Lohicca Sutta. But before we do, does anyone have any other questions concerning that, the Kevaddha Sutta before we go on to the next Sutta? And I see a huge text here from Jospe. I am going to reading these because this is being videoed, and the text did not appear in the video, so that is why I'm repeating all the text. So I am going to read this from Jospe. I tried to make this answer the Buddha gave in English text more clear in my own words. I like to review it if I don't mind? Okay, I don't mind. A, consciousness is the state or quality of awareness or of being aware of an external object or something within oneself. That certainly is one aspect of consciousness. That is not the only implication of consciousness, but certainly that is one aspect, one level, if you like, or dimension or aspect of consciousness. The state or quality of awareness, of being aware of an external object or something within oneself. That is what we might like to call samsaric consciousness. B, signless, is without motion or direction. Not just motion or direction, it's without qualities. What we're talking about here is ultimate consciousness. And ultimate consciousness has no characteristics other than the characteristic of sentience itself, which is the absence of characteristics. Sentience, pure reflexive consciousness in and of itself, is essentially empty. You find this also in Vedanta and Sankhya philosophy in Hinduism. C, all luminous is as opposed to partially darkened, knowing as opposed to ignorance. Okay. D, boundless is without. Also keep in mind that luminous energy, or luminous or light, is, as we know now, thanks to Einstein, an energy. So it's also energetic. So we're talking about consciousness without qualities as energetic. D, boundless is without limit. Bang on. Infinity, infinite. E, cessation is paused or halted. Consciousness is not dead in the state of being. In cessation, ignorant consciousness or samsaric consciousness is not paused or halted. It is annihilated. It is a fundamental and essential change of state from which there is no return. It is essential self-realization, which is annihilation, and that is cessation. It is the cessation or annihilation of every characteristic, of all samsaric characteristics, which is to say all characteristics, because the nature of samsara is that it imposes characteristics on being. So, considering this, the lesson in the Kevaddha Sutta is, if one holds his consciousness perfectly still, which is one translation of samadhi, the one preferred by Ajahn Brahm, not aiming one's awareness on anything, without or within oneself, then one's consciousness is boundless and all luminous, and in that state of stillness, again, samadhi, the world of form, fire, air, water, earth, which is samsara, has no grip on oneself, that is attachment, finds no footage, and the qualities and properties of the world of form, long, short, great, small, fair, foul, the pairs of opposites, duality, and identification W. Okay. I've reviewed it. I've given my comments. It's essentially correct. Consciousness, the first point, is both correct and incorrect. I see, in addition here, an identification with that world of form, name and form, are wholly destroyed. Only if boundless and ominous consciousness remains. Yes, that's essentially it. I'm just going to replenish my glass of water, if you'll excuse me for 30 seconds, and I'll give you time to think if you have any other questions before we continue on to the final sutta. We are at the end of the hour, but I'd like to complete, especially since we missed last week, I'd like to complete this talk. And I don't believe there are any other people after me, so if you're willing, we'll continue on a little further and just finish off these 3 suttas. Just give me 30 seconds to get a glass of water, and if there are no more questions, we'll continue on with the Lohicca Sutta. Okay, there are no more questions, so let's carry on then with the 3rd sutta of this group that we're going to discuss today. The Lohicca Sutta is the 12th sutta of the Digha Nikaya, and the location of this sutta is Salawataka, where the Buddha stayed during a tour of Kosala, accompanied by a large entourage. It is described as populous, full of grass, timber, water, and corn, which is the standard description of a prosperous place, and was run, access to insight uses the phrase reigned over, by the Brahmin Lohicca, who had been given the town by King Pasenadi. And all I can discover about this town, Salawataka, online, is that it is a town. There are must be a fairly minor place because there's absolutely nothing on the internet about it other than the fact that it existed. Lohicca has become obsessed by the thought that altruism, as we would term it, that's obviously not the word that was used in the Pali Canon, but it's the essential modern word that describes the meaning, as we would term it, is unskillful and an expression of attachment. Quote, for what can one man do for another, unquote. Therefore, whatever good one gains, and I'm just going to make a comment on that word good. I can find my note. Oh, there it is. The Pali phrase that Walsh translates as good doctrine, for those of you who have read the sutta in Walsh's translation, is kusalang dhammang. From the examples that the Buddha gives, enjoying the entire fruit and revenues, not giving anything away to others, not being solicitous of their welfare, and being uncompassionate, it is clear that the implication of kusalang dhammang extends far beyond doctrine. The word dhamma has a wide range of meanings, including, according to the Pali English Dictionary, thing. Can mean the phenomenon, or simply the thing itself, while the basic meaning of kusala is productive of merit, that is, value. Therefore, kusalang dhammang is a valuable thing, and that actually captures the meaning more accurately than Walsh's translation of good doctrine. Therefore, whatever good one gains, I just hit the key. Whatever good one gains in the largest sense of wealth, possessions, property, knowledge, truth, expertise, etc., in short, everything of value that one can take for oneself should be kept to, for, and by oneself, giving nothing to and sharing nothing with others. You can see how modern the Pali Canon is. Over and over again, I am struck by how similar the society described in the Pali Canon, which is, of course, the society of 5th century BCE northeast India, is to our society, and also the philosophical and cultural sophistication of the society in terms of its modernity is very remarkable, considering how long ago it existed. This ethical philosophy of selfishness has enjoyed something of a renaissance in latter-day capitalism in such ideologies as social Darwinism, capitalism, libertarianism, neoconservatism, etc. Lohicca, however, must also have some doubts, for he seeks out the Buddhist's opinion by inviting him to breakfast with him through his friend, the barber Vesica. And just as an interesting point, the term friend, awuso, friend or brother, was also used in the Sangha during the Buddha's lifetime, but was changed to Lord or Venerable Sir when referring to a monk of greater seniority, or to any monk when a nun, after the Buddha's passing, or parinibbana. The term appears to be a conventional mode of polite address, as amongst the Quakers, or the use of comrade by communists. We're trying to understand every detail of these suttas, so when something new like that appears, I do like to note it. Vesica told the Buddha about the evil thought of Lohicca. Despite Lohicca's evil thought, he has sufficient reverence for the Buddha to serve him hard and soft foods himself, and we'll come back to discuss hard and soft foods in a later sutta. The sutta tells us that Lohicca sat to one side of the Buddha on a low stool, an unusual detail. The Buddha asks Lohicca if what he has heard is true, that Lohicca has developed an evil argument, uses the phrase thought, or our line of reasoning, as described above. Lohicca affirms it, that it is true. Therefore, the Buddha asks Lohicca, quote, "If anyone should say, the Brahmin Lohicca resides at Salawatika, and he should enjoy the entire fruits and revenues of Salawatika, not giving anything away to others," unquote. That's what the quote within the quote. "Would not anyone who spoke like this be a source of danger to your tenants?" Unquote. Lohicca agrees that such a person would be dangerous. Thus, the Buddha takes Lohicca through a progression from being a source of danger to not being solicitous of others' welfare, to a heart full of hatred, to wrong view, to rebirth. Finally, the Buddha declares wrong view leads to an evil rebirth. Nirayan va teachana yoning va. Walsh conventionally translates this as hell or an animal rebirth, noting, however, that, quote, "It is doubtful whether either term originally meant what it was later taken to mean," unquote, referring, I assume, to the objectification of hell, or niraya, and animal, or tirachana, and rebirth is the Pali word yoni. The first thing to note here generally is that the Buddhist concept of hell differs significantly from the Semitic concept, and this is always important to keep in mind when we, and when I say we, I'm assuming most people here tonight are Western people, either Americans or Europeans, or other people that would be considered to be Western rather than Asians. People who have a Christian or Jewish or Muslim background, that's my point, a Semitic background. It's very important when reading the Pali Canon to realize that these are not that this is not a Semitic culture. And by the way, when I say Semitic, I am referring to the so-called Abrahamic tradition, which includes Islam, instead of the more limited term Judeo-Christian, which arbitrarily excludes Islam. It's very easy to project Western cultural associations onto the language of the Pali Canon, especially if you're reading older translations. You'll even find, for example, in some of the older translations as a translation for the word Sangha, which means essentially order or community, the word church. And hell is another one of these words. Our Western associations with the word hell are not what the Buddhist concept is. And it's very important to recognize, to not project these Western Semitic Judeo-Christian or Judeo-Christian Muslim concepts onto the words that the translator is using to translate the Pali words into English. This is a problem with Pali translation. That's the modern translations are better than the older ones, but even in the modern translations you find numerous examples of this. For example, the word deva, which all the time you find in the Western translations translated as deity or God. The word deva doesn't mean deity or God at all in our cultural associations with those words. So it's very important to try to be conscious of that when one is reading the Pali Canon. As is often the case, using a Semitic English word to translate a Buddhist concept is misleading for an English reader, with all of the historical associations that the use of such words implies. We encounter this problem repeatedly in many English translations of the Pali Canon, including modern ones. If I ever become a Pali translator, that's something I'm going to be addressing in my translations. Second, as Walsh points out in the Pali Canon, the concept of hell is far less hellish than in later Buddhist iconography, and a similar phenomenon occurs in Christianity. For example, in the Angulimala Sutta, which we'll be coming to, I can't remember if it's in the Majjhima Nikaya or the Digha Nikaya. In any case, I've done a talk on the Angulimala Sutta. Very interesting sutta, but I want to get off on a tangent. In the Angulimala Sutta, being beaten up by a small crowd is equated with many thousands of years of hell. Think about that in the context of the Judeo-Christian concept of hell, which of course is permanent and eternal damnation. Being beaten up by a small crowd is equated with many thousands of years of hell in the Pali conception. This relates to other references that the Buddha makes, referring to the efficaciousness of the Dharma. Nirayang, or Niryan rather, is equivalent to the Vedic Niriti, which means adversity, dissolution, the bottom or lower depths of the earth, evil, calamity, destruction, death, or the genius of death. Those are what the words, the Vedic concept means. Tirachana only means animal by implication. Literally, it means not erect, meaning, of course, referring, of course, to posture. Finally, yone is a word rich in significance in Indian spirituality, and it refers to the womb. A better translation of this sentence, therefore, might be, quote, "Truly, Lohicca, I declare that this groundless opinion dooms one to one of two rebirths, to be born in a wretched or a brutish state." I do have the Pali for this. I'm going to put it in the chat. I'm going to make a stab at pronouncing it. Michaditissa ko ahang lohicca dwinang gatinang anyatarang gating vadami nirayang va tirachanayoni va. That's my stab at pronouncing it. Walsh's concern for modern sensitivities notwithstanding, it's clear from the Pali Canon that the Buddha saw all sentience as a universal continuum that includes the 6 classes of rebirth, and therefore implies that any one class may be reborn as any other class, either ascending or descending, so hell beings and animals are obviously included. However, what he says isn't necessarily limit the rebirth to a hell being or an animal. It's obvious if you simply look around the world of today, it's very easy to be reborn in a hellish or even a bestial state as a human being. I declare that anyone with a pet, especially a cat, will understand this perfectly, and this doctrine provides a logical basis for the ethical prohibition against cruelty to animals, which has not always been the case, and which has little logical basis otherwise. I referred earlier to one of the Buddha's great contributions to philosophy being that he provides an ontological foundation for ethics, something that Western philosophy has failed to do since the death of God, I guess, in Nietzsche's phrase, the end of belief in the theistic hypothesis, if you want to put it that way. Indeed, providing a logical, I just already said that. Indeed, providing a logical, which is to say an ontological basis for ethics, is one of the great contributions of the Buddha to philosophy. And there are those who believe that the Buddha was the greatest philosopher in human history, greater even than Socrates. And interestingly, the life of the Buddha and the life of Socrates are almost exactly occupied the same period of time. Incidentally, hell beings is a very poor term to describe an inhabitant of the Buddhist purgatories. I say purgatory because no Buddhist hell is permanent. All Buddhist hells are temporary. So there is no equivalent concept to the Judeo-Christian or Semitic concept. There is no such thing as eternal damnation in Buddhism. But what is the English word for an inhabitant of purgatory? I'm not sure English has a precise alternative. If anyone has a suggestion as to what the actual proper name for an inhabitant of purgatory is, I'd like to hear it. Nevertheless, they are a distinct class of being, distinct from asuras, translated anti-gods, another hard word to translate, sometimes translated as titans, or even demons, but anti-gods seems to be the best. Humans and ghosts. Ghosts are sometimes called hungry ghosts, that's a Chinese innovation, who suffer intensely as their negative karma ripens. They are reborn in temporary states of enormous suffering and woe, through which they purge themselves of negative karma, and when positive qualities preponderate, they may be reborn as devas or even as human beings. Human beings are not the highest state, but they are the most desirable state. The Buddhist hells have such charming names as burst blister, shivering, lamentation, chattering teeth, black thread, crushing, great screaming, and great heating. Others sound less threatening, such as lotus, reviving, and uninterrupted. Well, I don't know about interrupted. That sounds a little bit iffy. The lotus naraka, that's the naraka hell, is so cold that it makes the skin turn blue like a lotus and crack. The reviving naraka has ground made of molten iron. Inhabitants of the uninterrupted naraka are roasted in an oven for an antarakalpa, a Buddhist cycle of time equivalent to 4.25 times 10 to the 17th years long. Despite these names, the doctrine of karma does require proportionality, in which effects are proportional to causes, and positive and negative effects precisely cancel each other out, so that each rebirth is precisely calibrated to the net karmic quality at the instance of death. Although human beings do not usually remember their past lives, devas, ghosts, and hell beings do. Since it seems doubtful that animals remember their past lives, this places humans closer to the animals in terms of conscious development. The conscious view, or the Buddhist view, I should say, concerning the closeness of humans and animals is in striking contrast to the Semitic religious worldview in which angels, which are essentially equivalent to devas, and humans reflect the Godhead, but animals and the earth itself exist only as objects to be used by humans and are inherently soulless. The Buddhist view is strangely prophetic of the doctrine of biological evolution. And I see a question here, or at least a point. Jospe says, in Dutch language, okay, in Dutch, purgatory would be called sort of less bad hell, where from return is possible. Dutch Catholics, however, believe in the lesser bad hell and the definite hell. Yes. Buddhism only believes in the lesser bad hell. Does Dutch have a word for an inhabitant of purgatory that differs from the word for an inhabitant of hell? Neither does English, as far as I can find. I can't think of one. There's different names for purgatory itself. It's called limbo sometimes. Maybe a limbite, I don't know. I should research that. Maybe there's some obscure word which designates that, but so far I haven't been able to think of it. In any case, that is the word that we really should be using when we translate any reference to someone living, a being, a hell being, in Pali. Eric Hunter points out the Catholics no longer believe in limbo or purgatory. Yes, I have heard that. I understand that doctrine has been deleted from the Catechism. Nonetheless, it is the Buddhist view, essentially. Eric Hunter notes limbo is different than purgatory. Limbo is where innocent and unbaptized babies go. Only innocent and unbaptized babies? What about people with just a little bit of sin? Like they yelled at their grandmother. Are they going to burn in hell eternally? I guess that burning in hell eternally relates to belief in Jesus and the precious blood of Jesus Christ as the salvific power of history. So it trails off into a completely different concept. In any case, that is the Buddhist concept of hell. It is a purgatory. I like to explain things thoroughly. I'm making an effort in these talks to develop a really incisive analysis of the content of these texts. And when we come to the end, I will be summarizing and synthesizing what we've learned. Walsh notes that the Buddha declared non-belief in the doctrine of rewards and punishments for good and evil deeds to be particularly reprehensible. Thus, the Buddha equates Lohicca's doctrine of active self-interest, which, as we find in the phrase, discovers some good dharma, as equivalent to immoralism itself. Jospe notes, many Christians believe the belief in Jesus as Savior would suffice to wash clean all sin. Yes, precisely the difference between Buddhism and Christianity, because in Buddhism there is no Savior in that sense. The Buddha is, of course, a Savior, but not in the sense that he actively frees people from samsara. People have to free themselves from samsara, but he provides the information you need in order to do that. But you have to make the effort yourself. The Buddha clearly sees the outcome of such a system when one or another actor has taken all of the available good up. That's obviously assuming a finite system, such as the earth is. And in fact, samsara, although infinite in time, I'm not going to go go there. The universe is certainly finite. Whether samsara is finite or not, let's not go there. In a scenario in which every actor seeks only their own good and no one else's, and seeks to maximize and retain as much good as he can for themselves, or for him or herself, without regard for any other consideration, which is essentially what Lohicca is arguing for. He's arguing for that, you may not have caught that, but he's arguing for that as a religious perspective. He's saying that altruism is actually a form of attachment. So it's a heresy, it's a heretical distortion of Dharma. A system that we today would call capitalism, such a system would fall into increasing competition for the diminishing quantity of good that is still available until the only good that is available is the good of others. At this point, all of the actors begin to prey upon each other with increasing ferocity until only one actor remains through a process of vicious struggle. Thus, capitalism leads to increasingly tyrannical monopolies until eventually we are left with a global dictatorship in which the arbitrary desire and self-interest of the dictator determines the whole system of social organization. And our American friends know all about this. At this point, the Buddha neatly segues from a discussion of a wrong teaching, which is Lohicca's evil argument, to a discussion of wrong teachers. Somewhat loose association, but okay. The Buddha identifies three types of blameworthy teacher. A teacher who has not attained the goal of asceticism and his disciples don't listen to him. A teacher who has not attained the goal of asceticism, but his disciples do listen to him. Disciples or students. And a teacher who has attained the goal of asceticism, that is, a teacher who has attained the goal of asceticism, but his disciples don't listen to him. The fourth teacher is the blameless one who has attained the goal of asceticism, and his disciples listen to him. The Tathagata, the term that the Buddha uses to refer to himself, which we've discussed in previous talks, is the supreme example of this. Elsewhere in the Pali Canon, the Buddha says that attaining the first jhana, or meditative accomplishment, is the qualification to teach Dharma. And that's an interesting topic. Who is qualified to teach Dharma? We'll be watching for references to that as we proceed through the Suttas. Lohicca sees the error of his ways, and immediately he takes refuge in Gautama. Note the formula: Gautama, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It does not the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The formula is Gautama, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The reference is as long as life shall last, quote unquote, shows that the ideal expectation is that one does not leave the order, although the Vinaya, even for a monastic, the Vinaya provides a way for the monastic to withdraw from the order without dishonoring himself. Today, of course, entering the Sangha for a short period, even as short as 3 months, is widely done in many Buddhist countries. Originally, it was not the norm. The expectation was that you would remain in the Sangha for life. And, of course, refuge is the same. You would remain a Buddhist for life. But one can leave, in the context of the Sangha, even in the Buddha's time, one can leave the Sangha ethically or honorably. And there's a formula for doing that. Okay, that completes the talk for today. We have one sutta to go before we complete the first division of the Digha Nikaya, the so-called moralities. The second division is called the Great Division. So next Saturday we'll be discussing the last sutta of the moralities, and then we'll summarize. And then the Saturday after that we will begin a new division, the second of 3 divisions of the Digha Nikaya, called the Great Division. And before we continue, or conclude rather, with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings, does anyone have any more questions about any of these suttas? I'll give you a minute or so to think about that, and if no one has any more questions, then we'll conclude with the dedication of merit. I'd also like to invite you to visit Zhuangzhung, which is the sim of the Dharma Transmission to the West group. And if you're interested in following my activities in Second Life, I encourage you to join that group. And if you're interested in obtaining copies of previous talks, they're all in the library at Zhuangzhung, and many of them are in the library at Mount Everest. So it doesn't seem like anyone has any questions. So I'll just put to anyone who would like one, of course. If anyone would like a landmark for Zhuangzhung, simply message me. And I'll also remind you, if you would like a copy of the note card of this talk, also IM me now or in the next 5 minutes, and I'll be happy to send you a copy. So let's conclude with the dedication of merit then. Whatever understanding, whatever positive force has come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all.